We'll get started here. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining Trails Across New York, What's Next for the Empire State. I'm Dylan Carey. I'm Project Director for Parks and Trails New York. And we are so grateful to our co-hosts, Assemblymember Patricia Fahey and Senator Anna Kaplan. Unfortunately, Assemblymember Fahey has been unable to join us this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to Senator Kaplan for a few words of welcome. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you so much to our friends at Parks and Trails New York for putting together this briefing on what's next for the Empire State. And thank you all for being here today. I'm so grateful to be co-hosting this Zoom. As Dylan said, we were supposed to co-host this with Assemblywoman Fahey, but she's not able to join us. But she has been my partner and has worked very hard with me on all of this. And I want to make sure that we recognize all her effort. In 2019, we enacted a law that developed a coordinated plan for linking existing and potential trail corridors to a statewide, interconnected, multi-use trail. The bill helped set the stage for real progress to be made on our state's trail plans, and it was one of our first successful collaboration. In recent years, especially since the pandemic brought so many more people to outdoor recreation, New York has become a premier ecotourism destination for people from all over, driving billions of dollars in economic activity each year. Thanks to the legislation we passed, the great work of the State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and the advocacy of Parks and Trails New York, we've been well positioned to capitalize off of the increased demand for ecotourism, resulting in a great opportunity for economic development and improved quality of life for our residents. Today, we're here to hear about what's next. So I'm going to turn it over to Parks and Trails, and with my thanks to everyone once again for being here.
Thank you so much, Senator. And again, thanks everybody for joining today. So our agenda for the morning is going to be on the slide now. As you'll see, we've got a great slate of presenters, and I hope you're all as excited as I am to hear from everybody. As you can see, we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. We'll actually probably have a little bit more than that. If you have any questions beforehand, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A function. I've seen a number of folks who have joined, who have been commenting that they've attended. I see Assemblymember Miller and Senator Serrano are both with us. They're both such great champions for Greenway Trails. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A function. We'll get to them all at the end. If you can't stay for the whole thing and you have questions, feel free to send me an email. Rebecca just shared my email in the chat. And many of you would have gotten the invite emails from me as well. I can either direct your question to the presenter from our panel that I think would be the best position to respond, or I'll respond to it myself. Now, before we jump into the meat, I just want to give a quick background on PTNY. We've been the leading statewide advocate for parks and for the greenways that connect parks and communities generally for more than 30 years now. And we've done this work in pursuit of improving our state's health, economy, and quality of life through the use and enjoyment of green space. We've worked throughout this time to promote the completion of long-distance trails to where today the state has more than 1,500 miles of bike paths, canal tow paths, river walks, multi-use trails, the things that we collectively refer to as greenways or Greenway Trails. And we've directly helped further dozens of trail projects along the way. And I just want to note a couple of them. Back in 1991, we helped create the Genesee Valley Greenway, which led to the state purchasing this 90-mile former rail corridor that runs south from Rochester. And today, the Genesee Valley Greenway is the longest greenway in our state park system. We helped 38 communities in 34 counties with the development and the promotion of 260 miles of trails through our Healthy Trails, Healthy People program between 2003 and 2015. And that was a program that was funded by a grant from the State Department of Health that really recognized the impact that local trails can have on community health and on well-being. But undoubtedly, our most impactful work was in our Close the Gaps campaign, which saw a string of disjointed trails that ran on former towpaths, on some former rail beds, alongside rivers, and from relatively humble beginnings, envisioned this continuous connected 360-mile Erie Canalway Trail that we enjoy today. We have millions of visitors that come and enjoy this 85% off-road trail running between Buffalo and Albany. And while our efforts to close the gap started relatively small with just a few folks kind of riding across the state, they quickly gained wider attention and broad support from the state to the point where in 2017, these efforts combined with renewed efforts to complete the Hudson River Valley Greenway led to the announcement that the state would create the Empire State Trail by the end of 2020. And that happened with the help of a $200 million capital allocation that I know many of you in the legislature were very supportive of. And now we can enjoy the Empire State Trail in communities across the state. And Andy's going to talk more about that process and about the Empire State Trail in a few minutes. So, but just real briefly, why Greenway Trails? Why do we, and more importantly, why do we think that you all as representatives of your communities should care about Greenway Trails? Well, we could probably give you a full hour and a half briefing on that alone, but here's the short version. First, health and happiness. Greenway Trails provide safe places for walking and bicycling. The CDC has found that providing access to the outdoors through opportunities like Greenway Trails and giving people the opportunity to use them can increase the number of people who exercise 3 times a week or more by 25%. We know that the lack of access to quality open space is a contributing factor to the rise of obesity in the US. And we also clearly saw during COVID how important it was to our mental health to have places to safely walk and bike outside. Greenway Trails offer access to nature without needing hiking equipment. We saw drastic increases in the number of people using Greenway Trails across the state. Use more than doubled from previous years in many locations. We know that along the Erie Canalway Trail alone, we saw an estimated 3.1 million visits in 2021. Now, trails have a number of economic benefits as well. They boost spending at local restaurants, or local businesses such as restaurants, also lodging and other retail shops. They raise property values. We know that home buyers seek to move near Greenway Trails. Walking and biking paths are consistently ranked as one of the most important features that prospective home buyers are looking for when they're searching for a new home. Trails also help revitalize economically stressed neighborhoods. Traffic from Greenway Trails can encourage businesses to expand or to relocate closer to the trail. And back in 2014, before the Empire State Trail was announced, we completed a study that found that based on, at the time, 1.6 million visits a year to the Erie Canalway Trail, that trail generated approximately $253 million in economic impact a year. That supported over 3,400 jobs and contributed nearly 29 million to the state's tax base. Now you can only imagine what the impact is today now that use has nearly doubled. But possibly the most important impact is that Greenway Trails offer space for alternative forms of transportation. Biking and walking are the only truly sustainable forms of transportation. We also know that the transportation sector is the single largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. 36% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation industry, and these emissions are trending in the wrong direction. They've seen the largest growth in New York State over the past 30 years. Now, expanding non-motorized transportation options by building out a comprehensive, connected, and well-maintained system of multi-use trails that connects people to where they live, where they need to go, and to transit options as well, that can significantly help reduce New Yorkers' carbon footprints. So greenways are really an essential part of decarbonizing our transportation networks. So with going through that kind of brief intro, I'm going to turn it over to our first guest presenter. Andy Beers is director of the Empire State Trail for the Hudson River Valley Greenway. Andy's going to share a bit more background on how the state completed the Herculean task of creating the Empire State Trail in just 4 short years, what that project entailed, and what the status of the trail is today. Andy?
Thank you, Dylan, for that introduction and for allowing me an opportunity to give a brief overview today on the Empire State Trail. I am the director of the project for New York State and have served in that role for the last 5 years. This is a slide of the where the Empire State Trail crosses the walkway over the Hudson in Poughkeepsie. Next slide, please. So my presentation is going to be brief today, but we have a robust public website for the Empire State Trail. It's primarily designed to provide information for people wanting to visit the trail with an online map. You can zoom way in and follow the trail across the state and all sorts of information for trail users. There also is on the home page a documents and resources section where you can find more information about the background on the trail. And for example, the picture on the slide here, we issued in 2021 a final report on the Empire State Trail where you can access that, download it from the website, and see a lot more details about the project. Next. So the Empire State Trail is a 750-mile biking and walking trail that crosses New York State. You can see it has 3 main legs. It has the Hudson Valley section from New York City to Albany, the Erie Canalway Trail from Buffalo to Albany, and then the Champlain Valley section from Albany north to Canada. On this map, everything in green is off-road trail. It's either a rail trail or a canalway trail, 10 feet wide with an improved surface, accessible for bicyclists, runners, walkers, strollers, people of all ages and abilities. The yellow sections are on-road pieces. So in particular, Champlain Valley is a bicycle trail on the shoulders of public roads. Its anticipated use is for experienced bicyclists on long-term trips. But from New York City to Albany, Buffalo, that 550 miles is 85% off-road, non-motorized trail. Next. The Empire State Trail stitches together more than 20 regional trails, each of which retains its own name and special character. The Erie Canalway Trail, the Dutchess Rail Trail, the Corning Preserve Path in Albany, and so forth. Each of those sections is owned and maintained by state or local government entities, but it's co-branded and marked and stitched together into a statewide trail. Next. The Empire State Trail was launched in 2017 when Governor Cuomo at the time and the legislature appropriated $200 million to create the trail. At that time, there were about 400 miles of existing trail segments across the state, but they were unconnected and disparate with long gaps in between them. So the purpose of the Empire State Trail was to build out and connect that network into a seamless statewide path. The $200 million state appropriation from the legislature leveraged another $100 million in various federal, state, and private contributions towards the project. Next. In order to complete the trail, 58 construction projects were constructed across the state. There were 9 participating state agencies, as you can see here, and that's part of what made this project a success, is that many state agencies pitched in and collaborated to complete the statewide project. In addition, 17 projects were undertaken by local governments, many of those by using grants from my organization, the Hudson Valley Greenway, as well as some projects funded by local sources as well. Next. In terms of what was accomplished with that investment, 180 miles of new trails were created across the state, connecting and creating the statewide network. For those sections where there's not an opportunity today for an off-road trail, our New York State DOT made improvements such as widening shoulder signage, safety elements to improve those for bicycle routes. And then we installed a Empire State Trail wayfinding signage on the entire 750-mile route. Next. The Empire State Trail was officially completed in December 2020 when the route was complete and available to the public. Next. Just to flash through quickly, some pictures to give you a visual sense of what was accomplished through the Empire State Trail. The Albany Hudson Electric Trail is a new 27-mile trail in Rensselaer and Columbia counties between the city of Albany and the city of Hudson. Next. In Dutchess and Putnam counties, Metro North constructed a new 23-mile rail trail known as the Maybrook Trailway along an inactive rail line. Next. The New York State Canal Corporation is a key partner in the Empire State Trail, and they constructed 8 different projects across the state. Here's a section in Herkimer County of new trail constructed along the Mohawk River, which is also the Erie Canal. Prior to construction of this segment, bicyclists had to travel on the shoulders of Route 5S, a 55-mile-per-hour road. Now they have access to this beautiful trail. Next. In places where there was not an opportunity to build a rail trail or a canalway trail, we created other kinds of shared use paths. In Westchester County, for example, most of the Empire State Trail route already existed on the Westchester North and South County trails, but there were some on-road gaps, and New York State DOT in this example constructed 2 miles of new trail along the right-of-way of Route 100. Next. In terms of our urban partners, a number of cities and villages built trail sections in their communities. On the left is the new Kingston Point Rail Trail in the city of Kingston, and on the right is the new trail, Empire State Trail segment through Sojourner Truth State Park, just recently acquired by New York State from Scenic Hudson. Next. And in Syracuse, a fantastic project. This is Erie Boulevard, was originally the Erie Canal route that was abandoned in 1910. It was filled in and made into a 6-lane road. New York State DOT did a major project to reduce it to 4 lanes of traffic and create a new multi-use bicycle and walking trail in the median on the Erie Boulevard. Next. We also constructed 50 gateways and trailheads to welcome and orient people to the trail. On the left is Buffalo Harbor State Park on Lake Erie. And if you start pedaling there and just keep turning your pedals for 555 miles, you arrive on the right at our gateway in Lower Manhattan at the Battery at Battery Park City. Next. In terms of what we've been doing for the last 15 months, next slide, please. Number one, as I said, 400 miles of the 750-mile route already existed in 2017 when the project was initiated, but some of those were in old and poor condition. Here's a picture of the Corning Preserve Trail along the Hudson River, the 787 corridor north of Albany. On the left, the 20-year-old trail with significant tree root problems. Last summer, New York State DOT used state transportation funds to completely rehabilitate and repave the trail. So you have a before and after look here. Next slide. We've also been preparing additional information to allow people to plan their trips to visit the Empire State Trail across New York. On the left is a large format foldable map brochure, which we created and is available free to the public to help them plan their trips. On the right, Parks and Trails New York just recently issued volume 5 of a detailed 150-page guidebook to cycling the Erie Canal section from Buffalo to Albany. And the Hudson River Valley Greenway and Parks and Trails New York are collaborating on a new guidebook, which will be available by Memorial Day of this year for describing the trail route from New York City to Albany through the Champlain Valley to Canada. Next. We've also been doing a lot of work on branding and marketing of the trail to attract new users, both from New York State and from across the country and the world as tourism picks up post-pandemic here, or at least where we are in the pandemic. We've made major improvements to the Empire State Trail website. I Love New York has been very active in promoting the trail, a lot of outreach to travel-based media and publications, and newfold programming and events to bring new people to the trail. Next. That's my quick summary. As I said, much more information is available on the Empire State Trail website. I want to thank Parks and Trails New York, who has been an advocate for this project and helped lay the groundwork for it through its efforts over the years. And I particularly want to thank members of the New York State Legislature. You know, at the end of the day, we know how to build these trails. There's a lot of work to do. There's engineering, there's planning, there's community engagement, there's environmental review. But at the end of the day, it's really about funding. Funding is the key element. We need to continue to build out this network of statewide trails. The Empire State Trail is meant to serve as the spine trail across New York State, but the goal now is to really complete networks, regional networks of trails, so people can travel the entire state on their bikes or by walking, and can get from where they live to the trail by riding or walking there, as opposed to having to get in their car and drive to a trailhead. So this would not have happened without the support of the New York State Legislature, Senate, and Assembly. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And I echo Andy's sentiments. I think he gave a preview of what a lot of what the following presenters are going to kind of the main points we're going to hit on. And I hope you guys are all as impressed as we are with the great work that Andy and the Empire State Trail effort has yielded. If you haven't gotten out to check out a stretch of the Empire State Trail near you, I highly recommend it. I know we had the pleasure of joining Assemblymember Miller for a ride last year in Ilion. If there's any legislators or staff that are based here in Albany, the Corning Preserve Trail that Andy mentioned is absolutely gorgeous. You can just get it right down at the Hudson River waterfront. Or there's that new Albany Hudson Electric Trail is just right across the river in East Greenbush. We would love to get out on the trail with you. If you want any recommendations for trails in other parts of the state, feel free to reach out to either Andy or I. Both of our contact information will be on a slide in a few minutes, and we'd be happy to direct you to some great recommendations for places to ride, walk or to ride. And while the Empire State Trail was certainly momentous and it connected a lot of the state, it really only provided that spine, as Andy said. And we had so much energy, we had so much momentum, and there was that potential that was there to keep connecting our communities, but we needed that vision. We needed a roadmap. And seeing that need, that's kind of what spurred this collaboration between Assemblymember Fahey, Senator Kaplan, and really work towards developing that piece of legislation that Senator Kaplan mentioned in her intro. The bill that was passed back in 2019 and then signed into law by the governor that November called on state parks to develop a statewide plan for non-motorized multi-use trails that became the first statewide Greenway Trails plan. And to talk more about that process and what it yielded, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Morris from State Parks, who was the State Parks Trails planner. And Chris really led the effort to complete that plan. Chris?
Thanks, Dylan. Can you hear me all right? Great. Thank you to everyone for having me today. Thanks to Dylan, Parks and Trails New York, the Assembly member and Senator, and Andy for really bringing the framework for our statewide Greenway Trails to grow. I'm going to talk, as Dylan said, about our statewide Greenway Trails plan that we completed in 2019 and 2020 to really take that next step, as to what the state's framework of trails could really look like. I'm a visual person, of course, and this is one of my favorite images from the Hudson Valley. So, some of these examples just really are eye-catching and inspire people to get out there. So I don't have quite as many fun images as Andy might have, but great places to visit on the trail, and they really stretch across the state. Next slide, please. So as Dylan said, I'm Chris Morris. I'm the State Trails Coordinator and Planner for New York State Parks. I work here in Albany with our Planning Bureau and coordinate trail-related efforts for the agency statewide, whether it's within our parks or on statewide trail efforts such as the Greenway Trails plan. Just a quick summary here, what I'm going to chat about, just a background and status of the plan's content, the vision and goals, utilization, and current efforts that we are doing. Next slide. So as the Senator and Dylan mentioned, legislation was introduced in 2019 to kind of ride the momentum of the Empire State Trail and develop a statewide plan for non-motorized, multi-use, shared use paths, or as we call them, Greenway Trails. As Andy mentioned, this is the Erie Canalway Trail, the Empire State Trail as a whole, Dutchess County Trail, you name it, Genesee Valley Greenway. We have a wide variety, and we're really, really lucky in the state with the kind of inventory that we have and the opportunities that are out there. The final plan was published on our webpage April 7th of 2021. Next slide, please. So the Greenway Trails plan describes the state's existing network of trails, including the type of trails that we would consider Greenway Trails, as well as the uses that occur on them, and it has examples from across the state. The plan discusses the many benefits of Greenway Trails and also highlights the current trends in trail design, management, and a lot more from across the country, as well as the state itself. It looks at trail user needs, as well as the utility of Greenway Trails for the communities that they're in and for the state at large. Most notably, the plan lays out a vision for the state's network of Greenway Trails, which is, a network of shared use paths that provide all New Yorkers and visitors with opportunities for healthy and active recreation, routes for alternative transportation, and the ability to connect to and enrich our communities' natural landscapes in urban, suburban, and rural settings. Chapter 7 of the plan identifies 7 key goals and their associated recommendations to achieve this vision. Next slide, please. So a couple components that I'm going to touch on really quickly of the plan. The first one is public and stakeholder input. For this plan, we gathered input and insight from stakeholders involved in trail planning, operation, and management from across the state, including partner agencies, local governments, regional transportation planning groups, nonprofits, and more. We also gathered input through a public survey, which received over 2,400 responses. Both of these efforts were conducted with the help of Parks and Trails New York and were critical in developing the goals and recommendations for this plan. Those interested in more details, results, analysis, the final survey report is included as an appendix of the plan, which is on our website. You'll see the link at the end of the presentation. The public had additional ways to comment as well through the form of public scoping at the outset of the plan, as well as a public hearing when the draft of the plan was released. Next slide, please. I got a couple slides in here. Some really interesting things I just wanted to point out with the survey. The trail user survey that PTNY conducted. A couple things I really found interesting, right? So 70% of respondents as a whole had taken a day trip to a Greenway Trail, either within the state or away from it. Roughly 40% of survey respondents took visitors from out of the state to visit a Greenway Trail, whether that was in their neighborhood or, in the region. So that really kind of speaks to not only the local benefit, but, the tourism, the opportunity for how special these places are to visit. Next slide, please. You build it, they will come, right? The number one factor to increase use, more trails in our area. That's what everybody wants to see. Next slide, please. The second component that I wanted to mention, the legislation directed the plan to develop an inventory, which nowadays is all in GIS and available online, of the planned, proposed, and existing Greenway trails across the state. Our GIS Bureau had an existing data set from previous efforts, but this is a really good opportunity to do a really thorough update of the data from across the state. As you might imagine, this wasn't a small lift, but we were able to accomplish this with the help of those same stakeholders that we got the input from for the development of all of the planned content. They participated in webinars and we collected their data digitally to put up on our web map. That online web map was available and is still available for public and to review, and at the time it was for the public and stakeholders to view and interact with. It also had an error reporting page. We wanted to make sure that we got the trails as best and accurately as we could. This is going to be a data set that's kind of ongoing and lives. Right now it's available to the public broadly through our webpage and our GIS services for planning purposes and for local and regional kind of visioning for their trail networks. I apologize, the motion sensor in this room turns the light off every 10 minutes, so you're going to see me wave my arm. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the plan lays out 7 goals to advance Greenway trails across the state. I'll read them quickly. First goal is prioritize the development and expansion of Greenway Trails in underserved communities. Second, collect and publish information to aid in the planning, development, and management of Greenway Trails. Expand the state's Greenway Trail system to reach more New Yorkers in more areas. Identify funding opportunities for acquisition, planning, development, maintenance. Foster greater collaboration among agencies and stakeholders, and promote Greenway Trails as a destination for tourism, healthy recreation, and lifestyles. And also enhance bicycle and pedestrian transportation options by connecting Greenway Trails and communities. Each of those goals has about 5 or more recommendations in the plans that really identify clear, logical steps toward achieving those goals and ultimately the plan's vision. And again, these were developed based on the input that we received from the public and stakeholders. Next slide, please. So on our end currently, we have a number of things going on, as a result of the plan. We are working with Parks and Trails New York. We're having quarterly meetings with those same agency and local stakeholders that we worked with to develop the plan. That ongoing collaboration, I think, is really important to know what people are doing across the state and really just collaborate, talk about all the different opportunities that are out there and, discuss where people are at in their development of their regions. We revised grant rating specifically for the RTP program, but there's an opportunity through that collaboration process for other grant rating kind of rubrics to reflect the plan's goals, whether it's underserved communities and what have you. We are currently looking at developing a Greenway Trails development kind of best practices guide for locals, maybe folks that aren't necessarily, they're just kind of wading into the trail development world and need kind of those initial steps and best practices to go forward. And we're also doing some spatial data analysis on existing trail gaps, and also how some existing and planned trails overlap with the environmental justice and underserved communities across the state. Next slide, please. So really, how's the plan going to be used? It's really for local partners and agencies across the state to bolster their projects by aligning them with the goals and the objectives of the plan. This can obviously help with project planning, public interactions, advocacy. We want the plan to be able to, folks can leverage the plan for project support. If a project can meet the goals and recommendations of the plan, it might give it a leg up in the advancement to funding through grants and things like that. We want agencies, locals, regional folks to use the spatial data to identify local connections and regional connections and how they fit with the greater trail network, the Empire State Trail and its legs as well. The plan lists, as I mentioned, various funding opportunities available for trail development through the federal and state programs. But really, ultimately, the plan provides that roadmap for state agencies, government, land managers, trail advocates to continue the growth and advancement of the state's network of Greenway Trails. Next slide. So as I mentioned, you can find the final plan on our website at parks.ny.gov. And I'm sure Dylan can share my contact information if you have any questions. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you, Chris. I think actually Chris's contact, Chris and Andy's contact information is there. And we'll have this again on a slide at the end, along with the other presenters. And we're really thrilled with how the statewide Greenway Trails plan turned out. It really is a great kind of broad view of kind of what's possible, what a statewide trail network could look like, and what its impact could be, and the importance of taking those steps to to move that along. But it's that bigger picture thing, and it's reliant on a number of regional partners and local partners to actually implement a lot of these projects, along with the state agencies that are building trail segments. And there's an incredible amount of work that's been done already, and there's even more still to do. And so with that, we're going to kind of transition into the next piece of the agenda. We're joined by two of our guest speakers who are going to provide updates on kind of two of the really more exciting regional Greenway Trail efforts that are underway. And then I'll come back again at the end and provide some updates on some of the other efforts that are underway upstate to kind of extend our trails to have communities take full advantage of the proximity of some nearby trail networks. But first, I'm excited to introduce Terry Carta. Terry is the Executive Director of the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative. Terry and BGI have been spearheading the New York City Greenways Coalition, which is seeking to complete a 400-mile network of greenways that spans all 5 boroughs, would connect to the Empire State Trail and to some other long-distance trails like the East Coast Greenway and others, as well as two trails on Long Island that Carter's going to speak about after. Terry?
Thanks so much, Dylan, for that introduction. Thanks for coordinating. And I want to thank Senator Kaplan and Assemblymember Fahey for co-hosting this morning's briefing. Very excited to be here. So I'm here representing and talking about greenways in New York City and a connected, healthy, green city. You can go to the next slide, please. And as Dylan said, I'm really here representing the New York City Greenways Coalition, which at this point is more than 40 organizations from across the 5 boroughs, some regional organizations, and a couple statewide organizations, including PTNY, Andy and Carter colleagues who are here with us this morning. So next slide, please. When we talk about greenways, as my colleagues have said this morning, really we're talking about, a system of co-benefits. New York City greenways are like Greenway Trails across the state. They're really delivering benefits simultaneously. They're multi-use, multi-benefit systems that address our most pressing needs: equity, climate, health, economic recovery, pandemic recovery, community cohesion. And greenways can do this all at the same time, right? I want to just kind of underscore that point. These aren't one issue solutions, but rather multi-issue solutions that address all of our needs at the same time. Next slide, please. So this is the planned and anticipated citywide Greenway network. So I'll spend just a minute talking about what this is, what the vision is, and its anticipated impacts in the city and across the state. So really, this is about a connector, right? Connecting the Empire State Trail, Long Island Greenway, and as Dylan just mentioned as well, the East Coast Greenway, all comes through New York City. This 400-mile Greenway network within the 5 boroughs is considered, this would be the spine network. We're talking about spines this morning as well. So this is kind of like the spine or the backbone of the bike infrastructure in the 5 boroughs and connects our parks and green spaces. In terms of who and how many people the Greenway would serve, about 8.5 million New York City residents, or 40% of New York State's population. It's not on the slide, but New York City pre-pandemic was getting 66 million visits a year in tourism. We're talking a lot about tourism this morning as well. And these greenways in New York City are really about equitable access and connections between 28,000 acres of open space within the 5 boroughs, more than 1,700 parks, 520 miles of waterfront. You can see on the map that a lot of the greenways in New York City are along waterfronts and then in critical kind of inland routes that connect the boroughs. From a climate perspective, there's a recent study in Vancouver that looked at transportation options and reduction in transportation emissions by people who lived within close proximity of greenways in Vancouver. And so their findings, and therefore the potential for New York City, especially where the average trip length is about 2 miles, there's a potential nearly 21% reduction in daily transportation emissions through a greenway network that is within close proximity to all New Yorkers. And when you couple that with a robust protected network of bike lanes and other infrastructure for alternative modes of transportation and allowing people to better and more safely connect with transit, we believe that 20.9% possible reduction can be achieved, and maybe then some. There's booming active transportation. We've all heard about the bike boom throughout the pandemic. Currently, New York City DOT estimates that more than 530,000 cycling trips are made daily in New York City, and greenways as a particular typology, as we've also talked about this morning, serve people of all ages and abilities. There's also a growing active tourism industry. In 2019, 11% of New York City visitor spending was for recreation. And that number we think will continue to grow as more people seek out outdoor, ecotourism, adventure tourism, and places like the five boroughs are on people's lists of destinations for that kind of tourism. The other piece of this that I think is important to mention is that with a citywide Greenway network and thinking about active tourism, that the revenues, the dollars spent for tourism will be distributed throughout all the five boroughs. So getting some of those revenues and the economic benefits out of the Manhattan core or North Brooklyn or sort of the more typical destinations for tourists, but rather, the spreading those benefits out across the city. And then of course, greenways are great job creators. It's estimated that an investment for a 100-mile build out of greenways in New York City would create about 34,000 jobs. And also link people to major job centers, including JFK Airport, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, Long Island City and Hunts Point, and others. Next slide, please. However, the current reality is a little bit different. You can see through this map that there are some greenways that are currently built out, but then the purple, yellow, and red segments are either greenways that need significant overhaul or repair, or are unbuilt and in various stages or not even started in terms of planning. The next slide, please. We'll unpack this a little bit more. So how did we get here, right? What are we up to and how did we get here? Completing and upgrading the New York City Greenways network. Essentially, the network is not connected. There are too many gaps. We're going to follow in the footsteps of PTNY, and we're doing our own Close the Gaps campaign here in the five boroughs. Existing greenways need repair and upgrade, and maintenance is inconsistent currently. Project development has lagged over the last decade. The approach to greenway development has been piecemeal rather than comprehensive and focused on network. And this is a function of greenways being coupled with other kinds of infrastructure upgrades. So for example, when a street needs to be dug up anyway to improve underground infrastructure, a greenway will be put in as a surface treatment at the end. So we are now talking with the city about a different approach that's more comprehensive and decouples greenway development from other kinds of infrastructure upgrades. And then finally, one of the ways in which we got here is that, the capital timeline is protracted. It takes a long time to get from planning to design to actual construction. And sometimes those delays are 5 or 10 years after, initial planning and design. Next slide, please. So how do we get it done? There's a lot that's already happening, that's progress made, and jumping ahead to the punchline here, as my colleagues have said, it's really about funding. It comes down to that. So public demand for greenways is at an all-time high. Use is at an all-time high, and people want more of it. Again, because greenways are the spine of the network, they're meant to serve all ages and abilities. They connect our green spaces and waterfronts and our facilities for alternative modes of transportation. The political will is there. The political will is aligned now in ways that we haven't seen in the last couple of decades, and our agencies are poised and ready to go. Just a couple of examples here is that New York City DOT has identified at least $290 million of shovel-ready capital projects. They're planned, designed, and ready to go into construction. Also, currently City DOT is working on a RAISE grant proposal for 5 to 7 greenway planning projects across the 5 boroughs. New York City Parks Department just completed comprehensive planning as part of their Destination Greenways program. So planning was done in Brooklyn and Queens, and they're already talking about the next round in the Bronx and Staten Island. And so, overall, city agencies are ready for a big wave of New York City city greenway development. But dedicated funding is needed, and I think the next slide will really illustrate this better. So last month, nearly 39 state lawmakers urged Majority Leader Stuart Cousins and Speaker Hasty to include $200 million in the fiscal 22-23 budget for downstate greenways. My understanding is that it is not currently in the One House budgets, but it is not too late, technically. And the next slide, please, will address this a little bit more. I want to be clear that New York City Greenway groups applaud and appreciate the $200 million investment for the Empire State Trail. As Andy and Chris and Dylan have all pointed out this morning, the results of that investment are incredible, are paying dividends to New York State and to New Yorkers beyond what we had anticipated. So this is not an either or proposal. This is really a both and proposition. That for New York City greenways, we're asking for a similar investment of $200 million in the current budget or the next 22-23 budget year to really jumpstart comprehensive greenway development project in New York City. And just pointing out that the funds invested in the Empire State Trail in 2017 were overwhelmingly rural and upstate focused. The urban investments did not include New York City's 5 boroughs or Long Island. And that downstate counties received $1.2 million out of $200 million investment and that was for the North County Trail project in Westchester, which is beautiful and amazing. And again, thank you to all of the legislators who supported that investment. It's very well spent and much needed. And the next wave we hope will include New York City specifically. Next slide, please. And just to put this in context, so the New York City Departments of Transportation and Parks Department estimate needing about $2 billion over the next 8 years to connect and upgrade the 400-mile New York City Greenway network. So that $2 billion over an 8-year period would constitute less than 2%, only 1.7% of New York State DOT's budget over that period. That assumes a $15 billion annual budget for state DOT. And as Andy and Chris and Dylan have talked about this morning, that these projects leverage significant local and federal funding as well. Next slide, please. And then as Chris pointed out, development of and completion of connecting gaps in the New York City Greenway network would also meet the goals of the New York statewide Greenway Trails plan. And just to highlight a couple of them here, the first is prioritizing the development and expansion of Greenway Trails in underserved communities. Of course, Greenways in New York City will address, communities of various income levels, and particularly build out greenways in areas that are transit starved and haven't seen the kinds of open space, transit, or alternative transportation investments that other neighborhoods have. Also, the greenways in New York City will help reach more New Yorkers in more areas. So the third bullet point, and then also the second to last, promoting the Greenway Trails system as a destination for tourism, healthy recreation, and active lifestyles, as we've talked about this morning. Next slide. And with that, I want to thank you so much for being here this morning. Thanks to all the legislators who are interested in greenways and championing greenways across New York State, to the legislators that signed on and are helping to bring funding to downstate greenways. And again, thank you, Dylan and PTNY, for coordinating and organizing this call this morning and for inviting me to participate. Thanks.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks so much for all the work your organization is spearheading down in New York City. The potential there is really incredible. Next, we're going to hear from Carter Strickland, who is the New York State Director for the Trust for Public Land. And TPL, with the support of a number of partners, has been working on a project to connect the Empire State Trail with millions of Long Islanders and really help make the network kind of truly statewide. Carter?
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you. Next slide, please. So Trust for Public Land is an organization that's worked statewide. And, in this case, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I know we're running late on time, but I really want to focus you on this slide. if we are, if the motivations in part include reaching a lot of people, then we have to look at the 8.1 million, according to the latest census, who live in the 4 counties here on physical Long Island, including, of course, Brooklyn and Queens, Brooklyn, where I live. And if the motivations include addressing climate change by getting people out of cars, then we have to talk about Long Island. And so, you know, the Empire State Trail is great. As I said, I have gone on several scouting missions to the Albany Hudson Electric Trail section, which I think is wonderful. And, you know, now I think the time is right to extend it all the way across the state from Manhattan to Montauk. And that's what we've been working on for the last number of years. Next slide, please. Here's our layout, and I did cut off Brooklyn and Queens, anticipating maybe a comment from Senator Liu. Yes, we do include the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway as part of our route, going from the Battery through Brooklyn and Queens, but we couldn't fit it all on the map. So this is what we're looking at here, using the same color scheme as the rest of the Empire State Trail. And you can see that most of this trail, and we have our primary recommended route at the planning stage right now in solid, and then the dash line represents some alternative routes, but it's mostly off-road. And we think that's wonderful. Next slide, please. We're able to do that by taking advantage of Long Island Power Authority rights of way. And so you can see here, utility line trails, Albany Hudson Electric Trail is one. There's examples from around the country, and more specifically, Suffolk County, who's a partner of ours, has built out the North Shore Rail Trail on a LIPA extension. This is an old rail line past the Port Jefferson Station, and it was signed over for utility usage, as you can see here. But I've ridden this. I rode it in October. It's wonderful. And what I heard from people there is, I think, illustrating the promise of Greenways generally and the need for it on Long Island, which is we've been waiting. Speaking to a grandfather who's teaching his granddaughter to ride a bike for the first time. He's like, thank God I have the North Shore Rail Trail, because there's no safe place on Long Island to do this. And it is true that sadly, it's a place that leads in pedestrian and bicyclist deaths. And there's such a latent desire for walking. And I would say that the number of dog walkers and people with strollers, at least when I was there in October, outnumbered cyclists, which was a surprise to me, but it shows you that it's really all walks. Next slide, please. The many benefits, you've heard about it. And, I think just to highlight some of the things that I think are relevant for Long Island in particular is revitalizing the downtowns, creating that sense of place, and really stemming a brain drain that's happening. I think we're all rethinking about what it means to work in a post-COVID economy, and focusing on live, work, play 24/7 communities, focusing on livable, walkable places, creating a strong sense of place really are what is important for retaining and attracting employees and workers. That's really critical. Another point I want to point out is, on the public health, we need in many places across the state to address pedestrian bicyclist fatalities. And, on Long Island, sadly, they're higher than most of the rest of the state. And of course, the activity levels to stay healthy are very critical as well. Next slide, please. Thank you, Andy, for that. I couldn't agree more. I was actually surprised to see that most users are pedestrians, but it's certainly it's cheaper. Transit connectivity, I think, is really important, and it kind of explains the rationale behind why we put at least our recommended route across the center of the island, because we are very close to a number of Long Island Railroad stations. And one thing that I think all of us are aware of is just the transformative impact of the legislature's legalization of electric bikes. And that has really extended the range for commuting purposes to 3 to 5 miles. On a pedal bike, most people think of 1 to 2 miles, maybe 3. But when you've got that boost, you can do it in more seasons and you can do it farther. And so that really does create the possibility for biking to a Long Island Railroad station. And if we get the parking right and we get the on-train capabilities to carry bikes, then it's more important. Next slide, please. we cross a number of redevelopment areas. Again, that speaks to the walkable, sustainable communities. Next slide, please. We are focused right now on a phase one. This is in both a 25-mile stretch. The whole thing is 175 miles. Our phase one is 25 miles going park to park. You can see here Eisenhower, which is a county park, really wonderful place. Of course, the very famous Bethpage State Park, where we're going to have the Ryder Cup in 2024, and we think that's an important motivating factor. Through a DEC property at Edgewood Oak Brush Preserve, where there's a big network of mountain bike trails, and ending in another state park, Brentwood State Park. This crosses a few counties and also a few north-south trails. You can see there, as well as some redevelopment areas like the Nassau Hub. Next slide, please. Existing conditions are pretty flat. I mean, it's really perfect. And you can see that this is utility, typical shots of if you've been out walking on a utility corridor. It's intact, mostly linear right away, about 100 feet wide. There's service roads on it already, and it's informally used as a path. And as we like to say, formal uses kind of displace the negative impacts of informal uses. But also, it's an amenity that's ready to go. It's quite a remarkable asset, controlled by a state agency, LIPA. So it's either owned by LIPA or Long Island Railroad, and all used as a utility corridor. Next slide, please. Many benefits. So even within a mile of this, there's 128,000 residents, significant non-white population, significant low to middle income population. So it is really servicing park equity. Does connect 13 parks, as I mentioned, 9 communities, and really critically, 36 schools and universities. So if your part of your framework is a safe walk to schools or a safe bike to schools, this is one of the projects that can meet that goal. Next slide, please. So we've been at it for a while. When the state kind of focused on doing those 58 contracts, which is an amazing achievement, hats off to Andy, in 3 years, and spending $200 million and plus another $100 million in leverage funds, we got to work with some very small seed grants from Long Island Community Foundation, as well as state DEC, the Conservation Partnership Program, through our partners at the Land Trust Alliance. And we got out on the ground, we met with stakeholders, we did a feasibility study. Our estimate, again, planning level estimate based on some of the costs from North Shore Trail, were $114 million for the 175 miles, which is pretty favorable if you think that the 350 miles that were of new trail that were built cost about $300 million total. Then that's it, right in the right ballpark. We did the next year complete a feasibility study for that 25 miles. These are all available on our website, and came up with a construction estimate of $17 million for that section. I'm pleased to say that we've gotten 2 state grants for the regional economic development rounds for getting turning our plans to designs and making it shovel ready. So 30% design. We're underway with that right now. We just recently in this round got another state grant of another $500,000 for 100% design. And I'm very pleased to say that just last week, we when the federal budget was finalized, we got a $2.5 million earmark from Senator Schumer in Gillibrand to bring us to 100% design. So we're busy getting finalizing that state federal money and also the state money for a design that will be completed in 2023, and we're the plan is to break ground in 2024. Next slide, please. Our many partners, the senators, of course, and Office of Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, Nassau, Suffolk County have been great, and as I mentioned, some of those early seed funders. Next slide, please. A lot of supporters, both on the government side and civic supplied. You can forward this because I hope I don't leave anybody off this. Go ahead, please. Seed money. I do want to just emphasize this, that Terry had mentioned the importance of planning money for those city DOT grants and also some of the important construction and design money that are in the state budget. And the state money does leverage other money, including federal. Here, the Conservation Partnership Program, which is DEC small grants through the Land Trust Alliance, really got us going and let us get some private philanthropy going to invest in planning and really staff time to get out in the field. Design funds are underway, including those 2 state grants and the federal senatorial earmark. And ultimately, the plan and the goal and the very reasonable expectation is that we'll leverage construction funds, either through the annual state environmental protection fund, which the legislature has been has had a lot of foresight in investing in, the state bond act, which the voters will be before the voters this November, and also American Recovery Plan funds that go to the counties, a number of programs at the federal level. And I do want to emphasize that because these are greenways, they can tap into both park funding, for example, the National Park Service Land and Water Conservation Fund, and also transportation funding. And so that is kind of a unique typology that helps us along. Next slide, please. Here we are. This is my last slide, but the Long Island Greenway, we're looking forward to working with our state and other partners to make this a reality. It's going to benefit quite a number of people, both tourists and residents. Next slide, please. That's it. That's just an example from one of our field studies of what it looks like on the trail, in high season. And it's a wonderful green corridor, and we're looking forward to getting more people to officially enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carter. The Long Island Greenway is such an exciting project to see the progress that's been made and think about what could be in the future. And so I'm just going to follow up on kind of what Terry and Carter said about the, with the downstate networks, and just give a quick preview of what some of the potential kind of further growth in upstate regional trail networks could be. And I just want to start off with looking at, Chris had mentioned in his presentation, the interactive map that State Parks has available of the maps in the Greenway Trail network, and looking at what we have today. So this is a map of what Greenway trails there are across the state open today. And it's impressive, but there are, as you can see, a lot of disconnection and a lot of places without trails. And so I just want to kind of run through a number of slides looking at some planned trails, some proposed trails, and then looking at what some trails that we have that are envisioned for the future, some potential trails. And I just want kind of you all to sit with this slide for a minute and think about, or look at the slides that Terry had, because unfortunately we don't have the kind of the detail at the New York City level on this statewide map, but just think about the potential of the statewide network and consider what impact building out these networks could have on your constituencies, on your communities. Just think about what it would mean for these places and for the people who live in them to see this robust, expansive trail network built. And the good news is that a lot of it's in the works. I'm going to walk through and highlight a few kind of regional efforts that are underway currently. The Bike Master Plan in Western New York outlined a vision for this expansive network of trails that crisscross the region. Already got the Empire State Trail. Large parts of the Niagara River Greenway and the Shoreline Trail are already built, but envisioning kind of extending those all the way to the Pennsylvania border or up to Lake Ontario, connecting them with the Ontario's trail network or with the Industrial Heartland Trails network that gets into Pennsylvania and Ohio, and could help funnel tourism in from across the country. There's also plans for the Southern Tier Trail, which would build off the existing Erie-Cattaraugus Rail Trail, run south from Buffalo along the former rail corridor to Olean. In Olean, the Southern Tier Trail would connect or could connect with the Genesee Valley Greenway. As I mentioned, it's the longest state park in the state, connects directly with the Empire State Trail at its northern end, but it's not complete. There's significant gaps in the Genesee Valley Greenway today, and we're hopeful that state support can help us close the gaps and make the GVG the asset that it promises to be. And I do want to mention that there's a lot of great work underway in Western New York, and that's specifically thanks to the generosity of the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, which is committed to investing $100 million in trail networks in the region. And that's funding that's been used to match state and federal funding sources and really help move the needle. Western New York is probably one of the most exciting places in the whole country right now for the the amount of trail development that's happening currently. And there's also a number of trail plans that are, exist for other regions. I know here in the Capital District, we've got our regional trails plan that was released in 2019 that envisions nearly 300 miles of core trails across the region. There's some longer distance trails that are in the works in other parts of the state, such as the Adirondack Rail Trail, which New York State DEC is in the process of constructing. That'll be a 36-mile trail that would run from Tupper Lake to Lake Placid and would be a great opportunity for people who are vacationing or live in the Adirondacks as a more kind of all ages and abilities access to the outdoors and to some of the beauty of that region. I know there was a question in the chat from Senator Reichland Melnick's office about some of the west of Hudson investments. And one of the ones that stands out to me as one of the more exciting kind of projects underway is the work to extend the O&W Rail Trail, the D&H Canal Trail. They follow the same corridor. And that's a corridor that would run from Kingston down to Port Jervis and then up into the Catskills as well. And I know Sullivan County has been aggressively pursuing funding to close the gaps in their trail. And Ulster County has been working in partnership with the Open Space Institute. And they've recently announced some funding for work on the trail on some segments that are closer to Kingston. In Kingston, as you can see on this map, it would connect with the Empire State Trail. So it's really about building out those other parts of the network that build off of that spine of the Empire State Trail. And then there's also a lot of exciting work that's underway on some kind of urban trails and connector trails that are smaller. They're not going to show up on that statewide map, but they have a huge impact on connecting people with the trails in their communities, making it more easy for them to safely access some of those regional trails. The Dutchess County Urban Trail is, again, it's a former rail corridor. They recently started construction, and that'll connect Poughkeepsie's neighborhoods from the Hudson River waterfront up to the walkway over the Hudson. And it's going to be open 24 hours a day. It'll connect hospitals, it'll connect Marist College, and that'll allow it to be ensured that it can be used for commuting no matter what your schedule is. And then the Greenway Trails plan, looking at that kind of statewide picture of potential trails, you start to see some other regional trails and some longer distance trails that could be built out. The Chenango Canalway Trail is one that could be built. There's a couple of short segments that exist currently, but one day that could follow its historical namesake and run all the way from Utica down to Binghamton. And then there's other ones that don't have a name yet. I mean, we've been calling it internally an I-81 corridor trail, but this is a potential trail that could run from Binghamton up through Syracuse and then along the shores of Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River over to connect again with the Empire State Trail in Plattsburgh. This could really be kind of like a second spine of the Empire State Trail upstate. And I do want to kind of point out that, while we're talking about trail development, it's not just about building out new trails. We're doing a number of things. I know there's a number of other efforts underway across the state that are working on creating networks of trail towns, communities that really benefit from being near trails. And so what is a trail town effort? What are they trying to do? So it depends on the community. They're always grounded in what the community wants to achieve for themselves. But at their most basic, they try to achieve one or all of these three objectives. Improving connectivity between the trail and the towns that it goes near. Improving those services and amenities that are available in trail communities so that those tourists, those ecotourism visitors are coming into your community and spending money, that you're making it as easy as possible to economically benefit from the proximity to the trail. And also that making sure that those services and amenities are benefiting local residents. It all needs to be to the benefit of the people who live in these communities. And then generally promoting a culture of hospitality, stewardship, and inclusivity in trail communities, making sure that everybody is feeling welcome and that everybody feels like trails are resources for them to use. I know that ensuring that there's equitable access to trails is not just about physical access, but it's about the culture around trail use and making sure that everybody feels comfortable on trails across the state. And we're doing a lot of this work currently, thanks to support from the Wilson Foundation that I mentioned previously. We're working with communities along the Genesee Valley Greenway on becoming trail towns. We've got 10 communities we're working with currently. And we're also excited to announce that this year, with support from the New York State Canal Corporation, we've selected Brockport in Monroe County to be the first Empire State Trail town. It's part of a pilot program that we're running, and we're excited that, hopeful that this year goes very well, and excited about the potential for expanding it to other communities in the future. And I know that there's other trail town efforts that are happening across the state that we're not directly involved in. Sullivan County is working on a trail town effort for the O&W Rail Trail. I believe there's an effort underway along the Adirondack Rail Trail. So, overall, it's just such an exciting time to be in Greenway Trails. There's so much going on. There's so much potential. And I think Carter, Terry, and I, and all of us involved in this work, just, it's so energizing to have that vision of what could be. I think we all kind of reflect on how lucky we are to have our job that is around greenways and sometimes lets us go out in greenways, and that's what the work entails. And there's such great potential for New York to continue to be this leader in building and promoting these networks of trails and communities across the state. So the contact information for the three of us is on the slide here. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions for any of us. I do want to kind of move along because we are running a little bit behind time. Yes, we'll be able to email the presentation out, and it has been recorded. So we're going to be putting this up on our YouTube channel as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who's my colleague with Parks and Trails New York. You've heard from all of us on kind of the ambitious plans that we have for the state. And now Rebecca's going to talk about what we're hoping you all can do to kind of help us achieve this. Rebecca?
Thanks so much, Dylan. I just want to say thanks to our sponsors, Senator Kaplan and Assembly Member Fahey, and honestly, everyone that's been able to join us today. It's really great to have so much support from the legislature, our partners, and everyone. This is a wonderful presentation, and I think showcases like the amount of work that can get done when we collaborate. That being said, we've now heard of several projects that really were made possible by creative visioning and strong partnerships. So we certainly believe that these partnerships and creativity will continue to spur Greenway Trail development, but we really can't lose sight of the fact that we do not have a dedicated funding source to construct Greenway Trails in the state budget, of course, outside of the competitive grants and categories that are more regionally based. Have no fear, we're not asking the legislature for this fund today, but we'd certainly be happy to discuss the idea of establishing this dedicated fund for Greenway development in the future. So we know the final budget is imminent, but I'd be remiss if I didn't commend the legislature. Thank you for the proposals identified in both the Assembly and Senate One House budget resolutions. We are incredibly pleased that most of the funding, the major funding requests that our organization and other partners have been advocating for were included in both One House resolutions. So we're hopeful that these funding lines will be included in the final budget. Obviously, they provide funding to advance many of these trail development opportunities that we're talking about today. So we encourage the legislature to support these proposals in this year's final budget negotiations, knowing the impact that these funding sources can really have on our outdoor recreation economy and the resulting economic, health, and quality of life benefits for each of your districts. So the first opportunity to fund trail development is through the proposed Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Bond Act. The Bond Act is going to be an important infusion of funding to help ensure that our natural environment is more resilient in the face of climate change. So greenways can really be an effective tool because they reduce our reliance on single occupant vehicles. They help improve air and water quality by providing the safe and accessible non-motorized transportation options that we all seek. So the legislature has kindly proposed to increase funding for the Bond Act by $1 to $2 billion. So we urge the legislature to support a $6 billion Bond Act in their final budget negotiations. And you can bet that if it's passed, that PTNY and our partners will spend the upcoming months educating the general public in advance of the November ballot to showcase the various benefits of this historic measure and the implication it would have for every part of the state. There are also several line items within the Environmental Protection Fund that can be used for Greenway Trail development. While some of these funding categories are focused on particular regions and specific greenways, they really are critical sources of funding. I'm sure all of you are most familiar with the Environmental Protection Fund, and it's kind of the one-stop shop for environmental programming, and it provides a critical funding source for stewardship, public access, open space, and land protection measures. So there's several categories within the EPF, including the open space and parks, recreation, and historic preservation funding, and line items such as the Hudson River Valley Trail grants. We've got the Niagara River Greenway Commission and a grant that Parks and Trails proudly administers, the Park and Trail Partnership Grants. And all of these funding sources can be used to advance Greenways projects throughout regions of the state that can include construction, acquisition, or maintenance. So we are urging the legislature to support a $400 million environmental protection fund within the final budget. And, you know, it's great that these funding sources are available for specific trails in the region, but, you know, as made evident by Chris's presentation on the statewide Greenways Trails Plan and some of the other panels today, there is a demand for equitable trail development across the state. So that being said, the legislature can think creatively about funding sources that are available and how they can be used to bolster trail development across the state, and ensure that the local leaders within your district are aware of these funding sources and take advantage of them if made available. So we know how much our trailside communities have benefited from the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, which has allowed them to secure funding for the development of greenways, bike paths, river walks. So the governor recently announced a proposal to establish what she's calling the New York Forward program, which would offer a competitive funding source for rural communities who at times can sometimes be slightly disadvantaged because they might not necessarily have access to a dedicated planning or grant writing staff, as is the case in some larger cities. So we were pleased to see that this proposal was included in both one House resolutions. We think many of the communities in your district could benefit from this funding source, and we think it's a great first step towards revitalizing our downtowns and transforming these places into recreation hubs. So today we're asking the legislature to support the governor's proposal for a $100 million New York Forward program that can support Greenway communities. All of this funding is really key to help us take advantage of funding that's coming down from the federal government, you know, including funding through the infrastructure bill, hopefully additional grants and opportunities that could come out of the Build Back Better legislation should Congress pass that. So we have many opportunities ahead of us, but unfortunately, as with everything, there are some challenges that will need to be addressed. Namely, a lot of this trail funding has limited funding caps. So this discourages larger scale construction projects, which would otherwise have like an incredible transformative impact. So limited funding for planning, it's absolutely necessary to get these projects to a point where they can be funded. So at the heart of it, we really need a dedicated capital funding source. We absolutely welcome further conversations with the state legislature to help reduce and eliminate most of these funding impediments. So funding is absolutely important, but it's not always about money, as we know. There's also legislation that has already been introduced that is critical to further support trail development and protect all trail users. There's a piece of legislation related to the state's recreational use statute that we'd like to see passed. It's currently being sponsored by Senator Harcum and Assemblymember Barrett. So this legislation would change the statute that legally protects landowners in the event of an injury, but it currently only applies to a specific list of covered activities, which includes things like bike riding, skiing, and snowmobiling. So the legislation would amend the recreational use statute to include a general category of recreational trail use as an eligible activity. So this would offer legal protection to landowners in the event of an injury or death if it occurs on adjacent property. It would also clarify that landowners are not liable even if a recreational trail user trespasses. So overall, we need support from our nearby landowners to promote rail to trail or other public use development. And the possible threat of a liability could severely deter critical landowner support for these projects. So we need to address these issues, and it would really remove one of the more commonly cited barriers to trail development in communities. Ultimately, we also need safer streets for cyclists and pedestrians. I mean, we saw on some of the screens here that some of our greenways are still off-road. So especially in these places, our roadways need to be safe and accessible for riders of all ages and abilities. We have traffic fatalities and speeding on the rise. This affects hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers year after year and can cost New York State $15 billion annually. On average, we see that 3 New Yorkers die daily in crashes. Hundreds of more are seriously injured from life-threatening, debilitating consequences. We are fortunate that we have groups like the New York State Safe Streets Coalition that can advocate for policies to protect all roadway users, address speeding rampant on our streets. They can educate drivers on bicycle and pedestrian safety and provide support to those that are personally impacted. So there's 8 bills on the screen here today that are included in the Crash Victims' Rights and Safety Act package that can help address all of these issues. So we're urging the legislature to ensure the passage of the Crash Victim Rights and Safety Act of this session. PTNY and other partners are constantly thinking about ways for New York to grow as a premier destination for tourism and recreation. And the legislature has really helped us make significant strides by supporting investments in our parks, trails, and public lands, and recognize the impact that our open space has on our local economies and the health of our communities. So we want to make sure that our state can continue to respond to the needs of the growing number of visitors to our green spaces. And we today are asking the legislature to kind of consider and contemplate 3 legislative proposals that we've outlined that can really strengthen our position as an environmental leader nationwide. In 2020, New York State passed legislation to legalize electric bicycles. So this was much needed and welcome, but the legislation as passed is slightly confusing for users, trail managers, and law enforcement, and included a number of provisions that deter users and kind of limit the viability of electric bicycles as an alternative method of transportation. So there are a few provisions that we'd like to see changed. We would like to eliminate the ban on e-bikes on roads with speeds over 30 miles per hour because it severely limits their use upstate where they'd be most impactful, and it would including effectively banning them on the Empire State Trail. We'd like to see the opt-in requirement removed for e-bikes on Greenway Trails, which definitely creates confusion for localities and residents. We get questions about it a lot. We'd also like to see the definition of e-bike classes changed to be more consistent with national industry standards. And finally, we'd like to see other technical issues addressed that have created administrative challenges and confusion for users. So we all know that gas prices have been on the rise recently, and we know we need to provide New Yorkers with safe, viable, alternative transportation options. So we welcome further conversations with the legislature to make sure that the e-bikes legislation and their corresponding guidelines are clear and understandable to the general public, and they provide the trail managers, users, and municipalities with the guidance they need to effectively promote e-bike use in their area. In December 2021, Governor Hochul passed legislation that required the Metropolitan Transportation Authority to develop a plan to promote cycling and pedestrian access on bridges and passenger stations. So this is absolutely an important step to increase safety and viability of non-motorized transportation in New York City, but it's limited to facilities managed by the MTA. So across the rest of the state, bridges often serve as barriers to pedestrian and bicycle access rather than safe connections. So we recommend that a similar piece of legislation is drafted that would address bridges managed by the New York State Bridge Authority in the Hudson Valley, by the New York State Thruway Authority, and by the New York State Department of Transportation that could provide similar benefits and would extend bicycling and pedestrian networks across the state. So this legislation would be consistent with the new Federal Highway Administration guidance, which states that bridges need to provide safe accommodations for cyclists and pedestrians if those users are allowed on roadways approaching those bridges. Again, we welcome further conversation with the legislature to make this concept a reality. Finally, per section 1151 of the Vehicle and Traffic Law, pedestrians have right of way in crosswalks on roadways. So the crosswalks effectively function as extensions of sidewalks. However, bicyclists are not allowed to use either the sidewalk or the crosswalk, and instead are treated as vehicles and subject to traffic laws. On shared use paths, bicycles are legally afforded the same right-of-way privileges as pedestrians. In places where shared use paths cross roadways, however, the right-of-way afforded to pedestrians does not apply to bicyclists under the current law. We propose to amend the law to clarify that bicyclists using crosswalks in locations where shared use or bicycle paths cross roadways have legal right-of-way subject to the same limitations provided in the current law. So this change would treat all modes on shared use paths consistently, which would increase safety and reduce confusion. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. I think we ran late on time. We've just got a few minutes left, but I will say that as a follow-up to this briefing, we can provide an overview of all of these ideas. We welcome feedback, comments, additional conversations. I think we're going to share with you our contact information shortly, but we would love to work collaboratively on some of these ideas. You know, ideally, we'd love to secure sponsors and co-sponsors for next year's legislative session. We'll include in our follow-up materials and a link in the chat, I think that Dylan just threw in there, is to sign up to be more involved in the effort to advance the development of our Greenway Trails into the years ahead and kind of work towards securing that dedicated funding source. Again, we have just 2 minutes left. If anyone has any immediate questions that we can address in a few short minutes, absolutely feel free to jump in. But if you don't have questions right now, we highly encourage you to take down everyone's contact information from today. Dylan, you know, had offered to kind of field questions to our different presenters, but you have access to their email right on the screen as well. But again, thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to speak with us or hear our presentation today. Thanks. A question.
Yeah, I see there's a question in chat about the last legislative proposal about the crosswalks and kind of clarifying that. Erica, maybe if we can, or leave the contact information on the slide, but basically the kind of long and short of it is that if you're a bicyclist who's on a Greenway Trail, when you come across a road that you have to cross, you don't have any legal right of way. But if you were a pedestrian, you would. And so, you know, we just want to make it so that all users of shared use paths have the same kind of legal status when it comes to using crosswalks that, you know, that when they're interacting with vehicles. So it's an issue that's brought up from a number of our regional partners and from many of those stakeholders. And so, yeah, I know Alejandro, you'd mentioned that you rode the trail, and you know, making sure that cars need to yield to pedestrians when they're approaching one of those crosswalks, but they don't need to, as it stands in law, yield to bicyclists. We think that all trail users should be treated equally, you know, treated the same when it comes to those crosswalks where they intersect roadways. Yeah, we'll be sending out some follow-up information. It'll have this presentation. It'll have some one-pagers from our partners and some information on these legislative proposals. And like I said, we'll have this recording available as well. Again, I want to kind of reiterate something that we've said throughout, but just we really do appreciate all of you taking your time to join us this morning. And we appreciate how much the legislature has been you know, great supporters of Greenway Trail development in the past. Yeah, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. And saving the chat, so we'll everybody that requested it, we will send out copies of the presentation to that. And so yeah, with that, I think we can call that a wrap. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks again to all of our co-presenters, and Hope everybody gets a chance to get out on the trails soon. Now that hopefully warmer weather is here to stay.